Hello, and welcome back to Forgotten Ties. Today, we're peeling back the layers of a story that feels less like a mystery and more like a ghost that walks among us. A ghost with a name, a face, and a smile frozen in time on a faded poster. This isn't a story that begins with a frantic 911 call or the blare of sirens. It begins quietly, almost mundanely, in the sun-drenched suburbs of Orange County, California. Meet Arthur Hayes, a man in his early 40s, with a face that holds the kind of weary lines you get from working too many hours, not from years of hard living. He's a landscape architect, a meticulous artist of green spaces and rock gardens, and by all accounts, a pillar of his community. He and his wife, Clara, live in a modest, beautifully kept home with a wraparound porch and a dog named Gus. They were a picture of suburban bliss, the kind of couple you see on television commercials for home insurance. Safe, secure, and utterly predictable. But as we've learned on this channel, the most predictable lives often hide the most shattering secrets. And Arthur's life was built on one. It was a secret he didn't even know he was keeping. The first crack in his perfectly manicured world appeared not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of paper. It was a late Tuesday evening, and Arthur was clearing out his late father's attic. Among the dusty boxes of old photographs and yellowed tax returns, he found a small, locked metal box. The key, he discovered, was taped to the underside. He opened it, expecting to find old coins or family heirlooms. What he found instead were a handful of weathered, folded newspaper clippings and a single, tattered photograph. The clippings were all from the same year, 1995. The headline screamed, "Local Boy Missing, Desperate Search for 5-year-old Liam Carter," and family appeals for public help. He recognized the face in the photograph immediately. It was his own. Or rather, it was a version of himself he didn't recognize. A 5-year-old boy with a shock of sandy blonde hair and a wide, mischievous grin. It was him, but it couldn't be. The name on the poster was Liam Carter. His name was Arthur Hayes. The box also contained a birth certificate for a boy named Liam Carter, born in New Jersey, and another, a birth certificate for Arthur Hayes, born in California. Both documents listed the same birth date, just a different year. This was the first of many impossible contradictions. The world as he knew it, the family he had, the memories he cherished, they were all a carefully constructed lie, a meticulously tended garden of falsehoods. He didn't confront his mother. He couldn't. She had passed away 2 years prior. His father, a gruff, quiet man, had never spoken of anything like this. The weight of this discovery was immense, a physical presence in the room. Who was he, really? Was he Arthur Hayes, the man who built beautiful gardens and loved his wife? Or was he Liam Carter, the little boy who vanished without a trace? The more he looked at the newspaper clippings, the more the details began to haunt him. The descriptions of Liam: a small scar just above his right eyebrow, a distinctive freckle on the back of his neck. Arthur ran a trembling hand over his own face, feeling the familiar, faint line of a scar above his brow. He tilted his head, feeling for the freckle he had never paid much attention to. It was there. Every detail matched. A cold dread seeped into his bones, a feeling of being a stranger in his own skin. His life, once a predictable path, now felt like a labyrinth designed by someone else. The people he called family were not his family at all. The memories of a childhood spent in California, were they real, or had they been planted, carefully cultivated to hide a horrifying truth? He remembered a family vacation to New Jersey when he was a teenager, a trip his parents had insisted was a family reunion. Now, a different, more sinister possibility unfolded in his mind. Had they been checking on someone or something to ensure the secret remained buried? The sheer magnitude of the lie was staggering. Why? Why would his parents, the people who had raised him with such love and care, steal a child? Was he a victim, or was he part of a larger, more twisted plan? The smile on his face in that old photograph seemed to mock him now. The carefree innocence of that boy, Liam, was a stark contrast to the man, Arthur, who now stood in the middle of a sunlit attic, a prisoner of a past he didn't remember. This was the beginning of his journey, a journey not to find himself, but to unbury the person he was always meant to be. The man who had been missing for 30 years, living under a name that wasn't his. The discovery of the metal box had thrown Arthur's life into a state of suspended animation. He went through the motions, going to work, talking to Clara, walking the dog, but it was as if he were watching himself from a distance, a character in a drama he didn't understand. The memories he thought were his own began to feel like scenes from a movie he'd watched long ago, replaying with new, unsettling context. He'd remember a scraped knee, a favorite toy, a childhood friend named Leo from elementary school. Were these real, or were they carefully crafted memories implanted by his parents? He couldn't shake the image of his mother, the woman who had nurtured him, taught him to ride a bike, and held him when he was sick. Was every tender moment a calculated part of the deception? The thought was a poison in his mind, turning the warmth of his childhood into a cold, terrifying lie. His quest for answers began with a quiet trip to the public library. Not wanting to leave a digital trail, he spent hours poring over microfilm, looking for anything related to the 1995 disappearance of Liam Carter. The newspapers were a goldmine of heartache. He found articles detailing the desperate search efforts, volunteers combing the woods, police appealing for tips, a community heartbroken. The boy's parents, Marcus and Eleanor Carter, were quoted frequently. Marcus, a stout, kind-faced man, a history teacher at the local high school. Eleanor, a woman with a haunted look in her eyes, a librarian. Their anguish was palpable, even through the grainy newsprint. Arthur's heart ached for them. These were his parents, the ones who had lost him, who had spent decades wondering what happened to their son. He felt a profound, alien grief for a life he never lived, a family he never knew. He learned the details of Liam's disappearance. The boy had been playing in his backyard, a small patch of grass bordering a dense forest. A neighbor saw him 1 minute, and the next he was gone. No signs of struggle, no ransom note, just a vanished child and a shattered family. The police initially suspected a predator, but as the months turned into years, the case went cold, a grim statistic in the annals of unsolved mysteries. The newspapers also mentioned a significant detail. The Carters had a close family friend, a woman named Beverly Sterling. The articles described her as a fierce advocate for the family, organizing search parties and appearing at press conferences. A chill ran down Arthur's spine. His mother's maiden name was Sterling. This couldn't be a coincidence. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered, were starting to fit together in a horrifying picture. He found Beverly Sterling's obituary. She had passed away just a few years ago. She had been a lifelong friend of his mother's, a detail his father had once mentioned in passing. A lifelong friend, a lifelong conspirator, perhaps? Arthur's search led him to a small, dusty New Jersey archive, where he found his mother's high school yearbook. And there, next to her picture, was one of Beverly Sterling. The same year, the same school. The captions revealed they were in the same art club and drama society. His mother was a talented artist, and his father had been an engineering student at a nearby university, a quiet, serious man who had moved to California for a job after college. The perfect cover. He dug deeper, searching for any connection between his father and the Carters. There was none. His father had never lived in New Jersey. The link was his mother, a talented, creative woman with a connection to the missing boy's family. A woman who, by all accounts, had a perfect, quiet life in California. But what about the other side of her life? The life she lived before she met his father? The more he uncovered, the more questions arose. Why would his mother, a seemingly kind and gentle woman, do this? Had she acted alone? Or was his father an accomplice? The man who had passed away so stoically, never once hinting at the monstrous secret he had carried for 30 years. Then, he found an article from a small local New Jersey paper, a human interest piece from a few years after the disappearance. It was about a family struggling to cope with their loss. The Carters had divorced. Eleanor, the mother, had moved away, unable to bear the weight of the memories. Marcus, the father, had become a recluse, a ghost in his own town. The article ended with a haunting line. The silence left by a missing child is the loudest sound a parent will ever hear. This line broke Arthur. He sat in the archives, surrounded by the ghosts of a past that wasn't his, and wept, not for himself, but for Marcus and Eleanor, who had been living in a silent, unending hell while he had been playing catch, learning to drive, and falling in love, all under a stolen identity. He knew what he had to do. He had to find them. He had to face the truth no matter how ugly. This wasn't just about his identity anymore. It was about giving a family closure, about filling that silence with a voice they thought they had lost forever. He had to find Marcus and Eleanor Carter and tell them the impossible truth. Their son was alive, and he had been living a lie. The drive from California to New Jersey was a journey back in time. With every mile, Arthur felt the persona of Arthur Hayes slipping away, replaced by a ghost of a child he had never known. The closer he got to the small, idyllic town of Fairhaven, the more the air felt thick with a sense of dread. This was where it happened. This was where Liam Carter vanished. His first stop was the old house, the one from the grainy newspaper photos. It looked smaller in person, the yard more overgrown, the house paint peeling. He imagined a 5-year-old version of himself, chasing a butterfly in this very yard, and a shiver ran down his spine. The current owners were a young family, their laughter echoing through the trees, oblivious to the tragedy that once lived there. He didn't dare approach them. This wasn't their story to bear. Finding Marcus Carter was easier than he thought. The old man, once a revered history teacher, had indeed become a recluse. The local librarian, a kind-faced woman who had been a student of his, gave Arthur a pained look when he asked for an address. "He keeps to himself," she said softly. "He never really got over what happened. None of us did." He found Marcus's house nestled deep in the woods, a small, dark cabin that seemed to be a physical manifestation of his sorrow. As Arthur approached, he could see an old man sitting on the porch, staring out into the trees. His hair was a thin halo of white, and his shoulders were bowed with the weight of decades of grief. This was the man from the photos, the one who had held press conferences, who had pleaded with the public to find his son. The sight of him was an emotional gut punch. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest. What was he going to say? "I'm your son, Liam. I was stolen by my mother's friend, who was also my mother." It sounded insane, like something from a cheap thriller. He took a deep breath, the cold New Jersey air filling his lungs, and walked toward the man on the porch. "Mr. Carter?" Arthur's voice was shaky, unfamiliar to his own ears. The old man looked up, his eyes a startlingly clear blue, clouded with a profound sadness. "Do I know you?" "No," Arthur said, his voice stronger now. "My name is Arthur Hayes. I think I know what happened to your son, Liam." He watched the man's expression change, a flicker of hope, then immediate suspicion, and finally, a deep, weary resignation. He had probably heard this 1,000 times. Every charlatan, every psychic, every well-meaning stranger had approached him with some wild theory. "I've heard it all, son," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. "Save your breath." "No, sir," Arthur insisted, pulling the tattered photograph from his pocket. He laid it gently on the small table between them. "I don't have a theory. I have this." Marcus's eyes fell upon the photo of a 5-year-old boy with a mischievous grin. His hand, gnarled with age, reached out and touched the photo, a silent, trembling caress. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't cry. He looked up at Arthur, a new, agonizing question in his gaze. "He had a small scar above his right eyebrow," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. Arthur lifted his hand, pointing. "Like this one." The old man's breath hitched. He then pointed to the photograph. "And a freckle on the back of his neck." Arthur turned around, pulling his collar down slightly to reveal the tiny, dark speck on his skin. Marcus's hand, now shaking uncontrollably, reached out and traced the spot. It was a moment that transcended words. It was 30 years of silence being shattered by 2 small, undeniable marks. Marcus didn't ask how. He didn't ask why. He just sat there, tears now streaming down his face, a raw, guttural sob finally escaping his lips. He had found his son. Not the little boy he remembered, but a man. A man who had been stolen, lied to, and raised by someone else. He had been so close, living in a world that wasn't his, and he had come back. They sat there for a long time, the silence no longer heavy with grief, but filled with the weight of an impossible reunion. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse. "My God, my Liam, you're home." Arthur's heart, which had been a hollow vessel for so long, felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt before. It wasn't just sadness, or relief, or terror. It was connection. A connection to a man he had never met, a connection to a past he never knew. He was no longer a ghost. He was someone's son. He was home. But the journey wasn't over. He still had to find Eleanor, and the truth behind his mother's motives was still a chilling mystery. The reunion with Marcus was an anchor in a sea of questions. He learned the details of Liam's childhood, the little things that had been erased from his memory. His love for drawing spaceships, the way he would chew on his lip when he was thinking, his fear of thunderstorms. He saw his own quirks reflected in the stories, a profound, chilling familiarity. It was like filling in the blanks of a book with pages torn out. Marcus, in turn, learned about Arthur's life, the loving, if complicated, parents who had raised him, his career as a landscape architect, his marriage to Clara. The old man was bewildered, but also grateful. His son had been safe. He had been loved. It was a small comfort in the face of an impossible tragedy. But Marcus had no idea about his ex-wife's whereabouts. Eleanor had moved away and cut all ties. The pain had been too much. Finding Eleanor proved to be the hardest part of all. A woman who had retreated from the world, a ghost in her own right. After months of searching, Arthur found a trail. A small, independent bookshop in a quiet town on the coast of Maine. The owner was a reclusive woman named Ellen. It had to be her. Eleanor, Ellen. It was a new name, a new life, a new beginning. But for Eleanor, it was just another page turned. A chapter she had tried to seal shut forever. When Arthur walked into the bookshop, the scent of old paper and dust filled his lungs. The woman behind the counter had her back to him, shelving a book. Her hair was a beautiful, striking shade of silver, and her shoulders were slender and elegant. He cleared his throat. She turned. Her face was lined with a gentle kindness, but her eyes, those startlingly blue, sad eyes, were instantly familiar. She was older, but the anguish from the newspaper photos was still there, etched into her very being. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft, musical. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. Eleanor Carter? Her face went pale, the color draining away instantly. She took a step back, her hand clutching the counter. I think you have the wrong person." "Eleanor," Arthur said, his voice pleading, "I know who you are. I'm so sorry to do this to you, but I have to." He pulled the photograph from his pocket, the one of him as a child. "I think you'll want to see this." She looked at the picture, her eyes widening in disbelief. Tears welled up in them, and she put a trembling hand to her mouth. That's my son. My Liam." "It's me, Eleanor," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm Liam." The words seemed to hang in the air, a bell tolling after 30 years of silence. Eleanor's knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, a guttural cry escaping her lips. It was a sound of grief and joy, of impossible loss and unimaginable discovery. She crawled toward him, her hands trembling, and touched his face, tracing the small scar above his eyebrow. Her fingers feeling the lines of a man she didn't know, a face that was a grown-up version of her baby. "My boy," she sobbed. "My sweet boy." He knelt down and held her, a woman who was a stranger and yet his mother, in a hug that was 30 years overdue. As they held each other, he had one last question he needed answered. The question that had haunted him since he found the box. "Why?" he whispered into her hair. "Why did she do it? My other mother, Beverly?" Eleanor pulled back, her face a mask of sorrow and regret. She looked him in the eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Beverly, she lost her own son, Liam, a few years before you were born. He was stillborn. She never got over it. The grief, It broke her. When she saw how happy we were, a part of her couldn't bear it. She was not well. She believed that you were meant to be her son. A second chance. She said she was saving you from the grief. Arthur was stunned. It was a motive born not of cruelty, but of a monstrous, twisted grief. His mother had been a victim of her own mind, a woman broken by a loss so profound that she had committed a monstrous act, believing it was an act of love. The truth was a heavy, complicated thing. There were no clear villains, only broken people and a web of sorrow that had entangled an innocent child. He had found his parents, and they had found their son. The echoes of a smile, frozen in time, had finally found its voice. Thank you for joining us on this emotional, complex journey. This story, like so many others, reminds us that the human heart is a labyrinth of secrets, and that sometimes the most profound truths are found in the most unexpected places. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Forgotten Ties, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter in the search for answers.